And so by making sure that these people are not so intelligent, they're also making sure that they're highly instinctive, that their instincts hit in. We are an animal evolved to a certain environment, our evolutionary match. And that evolutionary match is death. And so if you do that, if you take away our evolutionary match, our instincts don't hit in. And these include instincts to have children, that doesn't hit in, instincts to be religious and believe in God, and therefore believe life has eternal meaning and whatever, instincts to be ethnocentric. And the God thing is important because what religions tend to do is take that which is adaptive and make it into the will of God.
Namaste. Welcome. I received this WhatsApp message which really intrigued me. It actually said that an intellectual gap separates the Islamic world and the West. Muslim children underperform on most educational measures, and Muslim societies produce fewer books, scientific advances, and cultural achievements. And then it goes on. And I tried to find out from my team who this person was, and it turns out it was Professor Edward Dutton. He is a professor of evolutionary psychology, and we learn about what that means at Asbyro University in Lodz, Poland, and is a prolific researcher and commentator. He's an author of Religion and Intelligence 2014, Making Sense of Race 2020, among many, many other books. And I've ordered all of them from Amazon, whatever I could lay my hands on here. Welcome, Professor Dutton.
Hello, how do you do? Thank you for having me.
Good to have you. First, let me start with actually, my first question was, what is evolutionary psychology? But before that, let me actually ask you, I was looking up your channels and you called yourself the Jolly Heretic. Why that? Let's start with
that. I did some presentations many years ago, and people commented that I did them in sort of quite a humorous way. And then also that the research I was doing was quite heretical, that there are certain taboos in the West that perhaps aren't quite as strong in India. Things like discussing race differences, discussing sex differences, discussing the genetic dimensions of certain traits, discussing sexuality, whatever. So that's heretical. And so then I had the idea that that could be what could one call a YouTube channel, and I had the idea of it being like an English pub, an online pub, particularly during Corona, during lockdown. And there's a pub name in the UK, the Jolly Farmer. So I thought, why not the Jolly? And you have a picture on the picture outside the pub of a smiling fat farmer. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to have a picture of a jolly heretic burning at the stake for heresy and smiling and having a pub called the Jolly Heretic? So that's how I came up with the idea of the Jolly Heretic.
Nice one. Thank you. So let's get a little serious about what the talk is about. So tell us about evolutionary psychology. What does this mean?
So evolutionary psychology is understanding the evolution of the human mind. So all psychological traits have some genetic component. Some things are very strongly genetic. Something like intelligence is very strongly genetic, about 80% genetic. Something like whether you're left wing or right wing is about 60% genetic. In women, sexual orientation is only about 20% genetic, and the rest is to do with environment. And so it's understanding the evolution of the human mind. How has our mind evolved over time? The structures, the hard wiring, if you like, of the mind to be how it is. How has the human mind evolved? That's evolutionary psychology.
Very interesting. So, I mean, a little hard for me to take in a few things you said, but if I could humor you for a little more. So you said intelligence is 80% genetic, and so it's hard coded into our genes, and is it by race? And
so it based on you get twin studies and you get twin adoption studies, and so this allows you to understand the extent to which a trait is genetic in nature or is environmental in nature or is to do with shared environment or whatever. And in adulthood, the genetic component of intelligence is about 80%. The environmental component is basically having an intellectually stimulating environment. Now, in childhood, it's not as genetic as that because when you're a child, it's your parents that are creating your environment, or it's your school teachers, and they might have higher or lower IQ than you. They might be retarding your intelligence, or they might be artificially raising it. But then when you start to leave home, when you're about 16, you start to create an environment consistent with your own innate intelligence, and then the heritability rises to about 0.8, about 80%. Interestingly, in India, it's higher. It's 90% genetic in India, but in Western countries and most other countries in the world, it's 80%.
And this, so for example, 90% genetic has got to do with marrying within the same caste groups, or
precisely. So in the West, I mean, like stereotypically, you could imagine a situation where a lawyer marries his secretary. And there'll be a difference of maybe 10 IQ points between the lawyer and the secretary, and the child will be between the two. But in India, you've had this caste system for a very, very, very long time. As I understand it, even now, about 95% of people in India marry within caste, and indeed within Jat. So it's even more specific than that. Patel marries Patel, and so this means that intelligence is canalized genetically, and so the heritability of intelligence in India is higher. It's about a genetic component of about 90%.
Yeah, actually, it is the jati you marry into. There is nothing called caste. Caste is a Portuguese term, if I understand correctly, which is how the West was looking at India. So the jatis were actually looked at as castes, with a hierarchy. So, but that's going to be a separate topic. But yeah, I use the term caste here because of familiarity that you may have as well. So jati, caste, for this conversation, interchangeable, I guess. So yes, a large number of people still marry within the same caste, and yes. Okay, great. And so interestingly, you mentioned that in women, only 20% of women's sexual orientation is determined.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing, this. So yeah, sexuality is mainly environmental. So how your sexuality turns out, particularly whether you're heterosexual or homosexual, is really to do with your sexual development being correctly canalized. And people can be knocked off that canalization process and go through phases of being homosexual or whatever. But normally people that are genetically healthy end up back on that canalization process, and they end up being heterosexual. And so in men, the genetic component to differences in sexuality is about 40%. So it's 60% to do with environment. In women, it's only 20% to do with genetics. And the proposed reason is that female sexuality is much more fluid. It's much more fluid. And one of the reasons for this is that women our prehistory until very recently involved polygamous marriage systems. And you would have a system where, one man would have a large number of wives, and those wives would allo-parent each other's children. They would, a couple of wives or a group of 4 wives, would get together and help parent each other's children. And one way they could help to do that was by creating very strong bonds with each other. And one way that can happen is if the bonds become sexual. And this is why when women are put in prison, they often become lesbians. Because if you put them in an environment where there's no men, then in prehistory and evolution, you could imagine a situation where you've got this dominant alpha man, and he marries the new younger wife. He's investing more of his resources in the younger wife, and the wife that's a bit older is not getting as much. And so she sort of allo-parents together with a couple of other wives, and they bond strongly together. And so the female sexuality is therefore much more environmentally influenced than male sexuality. Wow. And men will tend to be you're either heterosexual or you're homosexual. That's it. I mean, it's a few people that are bisexual, but basically it's like that. Whereas women can go through phases of being gay and then back to being heterosexual again.
Wow. This is, I've never heard or read about this. So it's certainly, on the fences of, I guess, science, and I'm absolutely sure we'll get a lot of flack for this conversation as well. So, but let's go. Absolutely. So next question, coming to your books, I guess, and getting straight into the topic of this conversation, why did you choose to work on Islam, at least in one of your books, if not more, in the context of evolutionary psychology?
There had been, as far as I could see, there had been there wasn't like one book that brought together. There's a lot of research into the evolutionary psychology of Islam, in terms of academic papers and things like this. But I couldn't find one book that sort of brought together all of the research on the evolutionary psychology of Islam. That's what I wanted to do. That was the first thing. The second thing is that in the West, there's quite a black and white understanding of Islam among a lot of people. You either have these people, the left, who are pro-multiculturalism, and they say, "Oh, Islam isn't wonderful. Let's have lots of diversity. Let's have Muslims, and Islam is the religion of peace, whatever." Or you get those on the right, the conservatives, who say, "Oh, Islam is terrible. It's an awful religion. It's a religion of murder and whatever." And I think both those perspectives are wrong. Islam is a large religion. There's not just the Shia and Sunni split that everyone knows about, but there's they don't know about that in the West, but perhaps in India you know about it. But there's even within Shia, there's numerous sub splits. You know, like the Seveners, not just the 12, and the people of the third, still going the third prophet or the fifth prophet or whatever. There's loads of different groups. The Aga Khan and his group, all this stuff. And then even within Sunni Islam, there's numerous different kinds of Islam. I mean, there's a group in Turkey, are they called the Alawites? And it's syncretized with Christianity. So they where Christians drink the blood of Christ as red wine, they drink the blood of Ali, the successor to the Prophet, as red wine, right? So it's highly diverse. So I wanted to look at that as well. And also, I've been doing a lot of research on the relationship between Islam and intelligence, and the relationship between Islam and ethnocentrism. From what I could work out, what Islam does is intelligence in a modern complicated society seems to make you less ethnocentric. It makes you less group oriented. It makes you more individualistic. It makes you less likely to have children, all kinds of things. Ethnocentrism is then in a way the opposite of it. And what Islam seems to do is it elevates ethnocentrism. And in doing so, interestingly, it seems to reduce intelligence. There's ways in which you could say it reduces intelligence. I summarized it as why Islam makes you stupid, but also means you'll rule the world. And so I was quite fascinated by that. So I wanted to look into that in some detail. But yeah.
And did you go looking for this, Islam and intelligence and ethnocentrism, or did you come across papers?
I already found a lot of research which seemed to indicate to me that what a lot of Islam does, and to be fair, Old Testament Judaism does this as well, is it can be seen as in many ways a kind of manifesto in terms of group selection to dominate those around you and to win. You can pass on your genes individually by having children. You can pass on your genes in what you call kin selection by looking after your nephews and nieces or whatever, and you can pass on your genes in terms of your group. I mean, if there was two average Englishmen are more genetically similar than an average Englishman and an average Frenchman. And so if enough French people invade England, it's in your genetic interests to lay down your life for the protection of the English. And so, so this ethnocentrism issue is obviously something that can be selected for, group selection, and a society can do things and have policies which elevate group selection. And that's a lot of what Islam operates on seems to do that. A lot of those policies seem to reduce intelligence, and that's important in our current world because at the moment, what predicts having children is low intelligence in Western countries. There's a correlation of about -0.2 between intelligence and how many children you have. And people that are more intelligent literally don't want children. It's the same in India, but we haven't got as good data. But it's even more pronounced in the West.
Higher IQ, or because
people that have higher IQ. People that have higher IQ. IQ is a measure of IQ is how intelligence is solving problems. How good are you at solving problems? IQ is intelligence quotient. So intelligence goes up with age until middle age. How good you are at solving problems goes up with age. So to understand, obviously, a person that's an average 30-year-old will be better at solving problems than a very, very clever 5-year-old. So you have to compare it to people of your age. So that's why we say intelligence quotient, intelligence with reference to your age. And so then we can say that the average IQ is 100, and then those that are above 100 are more intelligent, those that are below 100 less, and so on. And I got interested in that because what I found with Islam is there is this something happens within Islamic societies, perhaps also in other less developed societies, but I've got a lot of data from Islamic countries where the IQ difference between, let's say, an English 7-year-old and a 7-year-old in, I don't know, Saudi Arabia or somewhere like that is about 5 points. So let's hold the English IQ at 100, that's the constant, and so the IQ of the Saudi Arabian children is 95. By the age of 18, that difference is 20 points. And so something is 80 IQ in Saudi Arabia, 100 IQ in the West. So something is happening in these countries, which is that they are not pushing their people to their phenotypic maximum intelligence. But we know that intelligence in complex developed societies literally predicts not wanting children. And so by making sure they're not too intelligent, it also predicts being ethnocentric and religious. And so by making sure that these people are not so intelligent, they're also making sure that they're highly instinctive, that their instincts hit in. We are an animal evolved to a certain environment, our evolutionary match. And that evolutionary match is death, and death all around you, and suffering, and high child mortality. I mean, child mortality 200 years ago was 50%. It's 1% in the West now. Even in somewhere like Afghanistan, it's 10%, only 10%. Which is what it was in England in about 1890. And so if you do that, if you take away our evolutionary match, our instincts don't hit in. And these include instincts to have children, that doesn't hit in, instincts to be religious and believe in God, and therefore believe life has eternal meaning and whatever, instincts to be ethnocentric. And the God thing is important because what religions tend to do is take that which is adaptive and make it into the will of God. That's what they tend to do. And so it seems to me that Islamic society, in its current manifestation, by not allowing intelligence to reach its phenotypic maximum, makes these people more ethnocentric, more religious, more group-oriented, more desirous of children. And computer models have shown us that, on average, it's the group that is high in positive and negative ethnocentrism that tends to dominate other groups. And so it's a group selection system, and that's what they're bringing about. Now, there have been periods in the history of Islam where it's become quite developed. I mean, there was a period when certain kinds of liberal Islam come along, which deviate quite strongly from the traditional Islamic model, such as you had in the Islamic Golden Age. Then, interestingly, they were the ones whose higher class, well, they were like us Westerners now in Baghdad. They were the ones whose higher class weren't having children. They were appointing women imams.
We actually have data
women judges
on children produced, or TFR, in the golden age of Islam.
We don't have data specifically on that, but we do know that it was discussed that the higher classes weren't having children, and it's the same now. And all the things that you have in the West now, tolerance of homosexuality, feminism, low ethnocentrism, thinking foreigners are great and let them come into your society, all this stuff. You had that to a certain extent in the 11th, 12th, 13th century Baghdad, and it was the Christians that were much more like the Muslims of today, that were like extremely religious and whatever. But because the way the elements of Christianity that they were drawing upon, and that's the thing with the Bible, it's so vague and there's so much you can draw upon. And the bits they were drawing upon were the group selected kind of ethnocentric ideas, and they were ignoring all the stuff about peace and love and Islam in the situation it's now in is drawing upon a specific kind of Islam, which the Prophet Muhammad was promoting once when he was fighting for power and once he got into power, not what he was promoting at the very beginning when he was in Mecca and he was struggling for power. And then he was kind of virtue signaling and saying, oh, everybody is equal, be kind, be nice, i.e. be kind and nice to us. If you're at the bottom of society and you don't have power and you fear a fair fight, how do you get power? You virtue signal, you purity signal, you play for status in the way that women do. Women play for status, but they don't play for status by physically fighting. They've got too much to lose. They've got babies to look after. They don't work like men. They play for status by purity signaling and by virtue signaling. And that's what he was doing at the beginning of Islam. And he was giving all this money to charity and all this kindness and whatever. And then it was when he went away, had his conversion experience, goes to Medina, gets an army together, comes back. And then suddenly it's an Islam that's group oriented. There's insiders, there's outsiders. The outsiders are infidels and they can be killed, and so on. And so there's different ways that Islam oscillates, and at the moment it's that group oriented way that makes you come to power.
You said a lot of things, and I have a lot of questions. So let's start with the first one. So you said when kids are born, or they're 5 years old, is that right? The difference is of 5 points between an English child and a Saudi child.
Yeah, and other Muslim countries as well.
And other Muslim countries. Okay, and then it grows. The difference grows to about 20 points.
About 20 points, yeah.
Is this the IQ being measured? And so we're saying that the IQ is not sort of genetic and hardwired into us, and it changes with the environment, with what we're taught.
So there's two. The correlation between IQ at the age of, let's say, 6 and at the age of 18 in let's say England, among English people, is about 0.6. So that means that in general, if you're a clever child, you'll be a clever adult, and if you're a stupid child, you'll be a stupid adult. But there's room for variance because people develop at different rates. You have what's called a fast life history strategy and a slow life history strategy. So fast life history strategy is that you're evolved to an unstable yet easy ecology. You live fast, die young, grow up quickly, pass your genes on quickly, have as many kids as you can, don't invest much energy in them because they could all be just killed. And then die young. A slow ecology is that you reach the carrying capacity for the species, and then you're competing against each other. And so it's a harsh ecology. It's stable, but it's harsh. And then you have to slow down, and you have to make sure that if you have lots of offspring and you don't invest in them, they could all just die. So you have to have a small number of offspring, you have to invest a great deal in them, you have to make sure that they're absolutely adapted to a specific niche in the environment, very like the caste system, a specific, very specific niche in the environment. To ensure that's the case, they are plastic for longer, so they have a longer childhood, a longer period where they can learn things, and they basically go through puberty later, longer childhood. They even go through the menopause later in the case of women. Everything slows down, and so what you'll notice is that children, let's say, who are black, are born younger. They're born like about a few weeks younger than white kids. And the growth milestones they go through, sitting up and walking and talking, all happen younger. So when they are younger, they are more intelligent. Basically, a 5-year-old black child will be probably more intelligent than a 5-year-old Japanese child because he's growing up quicker. But eventually the Japanese child will take over. And you end up with this difference in IQ. The Japanese have an IQ of 107. Now, what could be going on, possibly, with people from Asia, from South Asia, is that in terms of life history strategy, the environment is slightly easier. It's hotter. There's a longer summer. There's basic needs are met to a greater extent. So it's a faster life history strategy. It's less stable because you've got tropical diseases that can break out and monsoons and God knows what. And it's easier because it doesn't have freezing cold winters where you could die. So it could be that they are slightly faster life history strategists. That could be part of it. So they are like cleverer when they are 6, but it doesn't. That could be part of it. Probably is part of it. But I think also part of it is just that the education system is very bad, and the environment does not push you to your phenotypic maximum intelligence. In fact, we did studies, myself and my colleagues in Saudi Arabia, where we looked at what's called Flynn effect. So IQs going up across time or down across time. And you note that when a country like Kuwait has a liberal Western-looking government, then the IQs of the children go up. because
Just
they are
within a generation,
within
just within
10
their
years,
lifetime,
10 years, 10 years, because the children are now being taught more science, they're being taught to think, they're being taught to, think in a, whereas then you get a conservative government in Saudi, in Kuwait, they put less time into science and whatever, they put more time into just learning the Quran, and that's less intellectually stimulating, and so IQ goes down. And equally in Saudi Arabia, this is interesting. You find that in areas where women are strongly controlled and they can't really go outside, so really conservative areas of Saudi Arabia, like Riyadh, then they, of course, what they like to do. So they just read books and they end up with a higher IQ than women that come from Jeddah, where they don't have to wear the veil and they can run about and do what they like. And so it's interesting because it's very liberal in Jeddah. And so you get these differences based on these kinds of factors, and in particular on the kind of Islam you're dealing with.
So IQ also changes beyond, I mean, even grown-up women would, become better, have higher IQ scores, from middle age or something. Is that?
Yeah. So IQ, the 20% of what the differences in intelligence are to do with environment, and in particular, an intellectually stimulating environment. So if you hang around with intelligent people, right, then it's like that will push you do intellectually stimulating things, like having your big YouTube channel and talking to, I don't know, people that are interesting and whatever, then this pushes your IQ to its phenotypic maximum. If you stop doing that and just go and spend your time, I don't know, dancing and partying and having a laugh, then you won't be pushing your IQ to its maximum in the same way, and so it won't be as high. Like if you think about having a job as a doctor, and that's an intellectually stimulating job, and so you're pushing your IQ to its phenotypic maximum all the time, and then you retire and you just spend your time playing golf. Now, okay, golf, you've got to think about it. Golf, fine, I appreciate that, but it's not as intellectually stimulating as being a doctor. And so you would imagine that the person's intelligence would decline. So who you hang around with, who are your friends, and the thing is, people that are intelligent will tend to be attracted to other intelligent people, and people that aren't very intelligent will tend to be attracted to people that aren't very intelligent. And so there's this kind of, what's it called? Is it a Matthew effect? From he who has nothing, even what they have will be taken away. That's kind of how it works. But going back to Saudi Arabia, yeah, you have a society which, to a certain extent, does not value thinking and science and whatever. It values religion, and that does not help to push people to their phenotypic maximum IQ.
And this is real data that people who are more intelligent, have more high IQ, have lesser and lesser children, because we are told this is a consequence of urbanization globally and of women going to work, as more and more women are getting employed, families are becoming more and more nuclear, children are going down. So this is
there's a number of, in terms of the negative correlation, there's a number of reasons for, and exists in most countries. There's a number of reasons for it. But I think that when we think about the fact that in Rome, in Baghdad, in Athens, it was noticed towards the winter of civilization. Like once you have central heating, once you basically take us away from an ecology of death, then the upper class people, i.e. the more intelligent people, stop wanting children. They're the first to stop wanting them. Why? Because they're not in an evolutionary match. Well, you could argue no one's in an evolutionary match, but if you're rich, you're particularly not in an evolutionary match because you're going to have better access to medicine and resources and whatever, and so there'll be less death surrounding you. And also there's some evidence that intelligence is associated with being environmentally sensitive. So if you think, like, what is intelligence? It's solving a problem. How do you solve a problem? Well, you've got to rise above your instincts. We've got these cognitive biases that are built into us. We have to rise above those. So if we're basically less instinctive, if there's less hard wiring into us, and we're more environmentally plastic, we'll be better at solving problems. So it follows that intelligent people will be more environmentally plastic, more sensitive. And there is evidence of that intelligent people will remain in an environmentally sensitive state to a later stage in their development. And so it would follow that if intelligent people will be much more sensitive to an evolutionary mismatch than less intelligent people that will just have things like a desire for children or ethnocentrism or religion or whatever just built into them more. And so an intelligent person needs to be carefully nurtured along the exact evolutionarily adaptive roadmap of life, or he goes haywire. He goes off on one. And equally, perhaps even, I mean, in terms of life history strategy that I mentioned earlier, slow life history strategy, much more environmentally sensitive, much more adapted to a very specific niche, much more environmentally plastic, much more needing to be pushed along the evolutionarily adaptive roadmap of life. And this, I suggest, is why fertility in Korea and Japan is so low, because those people are more intelligent than us, and they are more slow life history strategy than us, and so they've gone completely haywire. And there's a fertility in South Korea is like 0.8 or something. It's not even 1. I mean, these people are dying out. As for the reasons why for that relationship, then I do think the first reason is just that intelligent people are more environmentally plastic, and therefore they're in an evolutionary mismatch, and they just don't want to have children, and so they don't. The second reason is contraception, rise of contraception. If you take either the pill the exact same time every day, or do you take it with a cup of tea at the end of the day when you remember? Right, and that is the difference between getting pregnant and not getting pregnant. And a more intelligent woman will carefully take it at the same time every day. Intelligent people are better able to use contraception, and they're less impulsive, so they're more willing to use contraception. So you have fewer unwanted pregnancies. The second reason, as you say, is feminism. If I think about England when I was a kid, you know, the low IQ girl, she drops out of school at 16, and you know, and gets pregnant by some bloke, and she has a load of children by a load of men, and she's like a grandmother by the age of 38. So she doesn't just have more children, she has more generations. And then at 38, the more intelligent woman, you know, she's dedicated all of her 20s to her career and her university education, and she finally has like 1 child or 2 children. So that's the second reason, feminism. The third reason is welfare. Welfare is a big thing in Western countries, and you can live off it. A woman gets, in England, who is unemployed, gets £500 for every child she has from the government a month. So it's literally in the interest of a not very intelligent woman to have loads and loads of kids. And in this regard, what we find is that if you divide England between those where both parents are working, IQ about 100, those where one parent's on welfare, IQ 90, those where both parents are on welfare, IQ 85, and those where both parents are on welfare and it requires interventions from the police and social workers, i.e. the criminal underclass, only those people have above replacement fertility. So all of this comes together to mean that, intelligence is going down. It's been going down probably since about 1900, based on numerous measures we have, all in the same direction. I mean, like the prevalence of alleles that are associated with IQ is going down. Based on all of these different measures, we are probably losing about 1 IQ point per decade. And that's important because if
I thought we should be getting more intelligent. Why are we getting less intelligent?
Why would we be getting more intelligent if low IQ predicts having children? Heritability of intelligence is 80%. We were getting more. We were getting. If you look at my book, At Our Wits' End, Why We're Becoming Less Intelligent, What It Means for the Future, under harsh Darwinian conditions, i.e., child mortality 50% until 1800, we were selecting for intelligence. Yes.
But we've been prospering since then, right? Societies globally, including in Europe, have been rising. Every generation has been getting richer in both Europe and in the US.
But that's because, so if you think about the Industrial Revolution, that sets off something massive. So all that has to happen for that is that the fruits of the Industrial Revolution are so enormous that they can and their ability to generate wealth and a better standard of living so massive that they can outpace the decline in intelligence. Like think of it as a bit like capital. So we have this amazing, brilliant ancestor who was born in a little hovel and has drawn himself out of the most appalling poverty into the heights of wealth and achievement via his own brilliance, and he creates this capital. And we're his spoilt, privately educated, dim-witted son, But all we have to do to keep that capital growing is just minor tinkering, to keep the capital growing and growing and growing. And as long as the capital grows at a faster rate to offset our declining intelligence, and as long as it grows at a faster rate than population grows, then standards of living will go up and up and up. Even though we're becoming less intelligent, all we have to do is little minor tinkering, little betting on the stock market here and there, and so the standard of living goes up and up and up. Now, eventually, what would happen is we would become so stupid that our declining IQ would be outpaced by the growth in capital to a lesser and lesser and lesser extent, and eventually it wouldn't be outpaced, and then we'd have to eat into the capital. We'd have to start using the capital, and then we'd go backwards. But it's the same. I mean, with just basic economics, with the concept of a loan, a person who is, you borrow money from the bank charges interest, you make money from what you've borrowed, and as long as what you've borrowed outpaces the interest, then you're making more. And it's a similar thing. So going back to what I was saying, what was happening until the Industrial Revolution was you had a society in England, we have a lot of data on this, of social dissent. So it's a harsh society, we're only just surviving, and a lot of people starve to death. It's competitive, and so every generation, those at the bottom of society, they die off. They're removed from the gene pool, and the more intelligent they grow, and so those people have to move down to fill the places vacated by those at the bottom. It's a society of social descent, in which we're selecting for intelligence, and we know that because if you look at the wills from 17th century England, you find that the richer 50% of testators, and indeed the richer 50% of people, had about double the completed fertility of the poorer 50%. And wealth correlates with intelligence at about 0.4. It's a very good correlate of intelligence. So we were selecting for intelligence. We were becoming cleverer. You can see in data from representative samples of skulls, heads are becoming bigger across time, from medieval England to about 1800. Why? Well, because the brain's becoming bigger, and the brain is a thinking muscle, and it correlates with IQ at about 0.3. The per capita genius, basically, major accepted innovations, these are going up across time because the smart fraction, i.e. the top, the people with an IQ of about 130 within the society, are getting cleverer and cleverer, bigger and bigger. And so on all of these measures, we're going up. We're also getting less cruel. We're getting literacy is going up despite standards of living not going up. Numeracy is going up. Interest rates are going down. And low interest rates are a sign of intelligence because it's future orientation. If you're intelligent, you require you require less of a hit now to do something good for the future. You think about the future more. That thing where you give a child
delay gratification, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Delay gratification. So a child that's intelligent, you give it a marshmallow. You say you have this marshmallow now, or you have 2 marshmallows in 5 minutes, and the cleverer child will always wait 5 minutes. And it's like that. So we were becoming more intelligent, and there's also alleles associated with intelligence based on representative samples of skeletons are increasing. Now, then you have the Industrial Revolution, and this changes everything because it means that we have better medicine, we have inoculations, we have better housing, we have cheaper food, we have all of the benefits of civilization, and so the child mortality rate collapses. Now, who does that affect? Well, it's the lower class, it's the less intelligent. It's their child mortality rate. It's been really, really high. It's like really, really high. A lot of them, all their children die. Now this isn't happening. And so suddenly we're no longer harshly selecting against intelligence or against health. Intelligence bundles together with genetic health, mental health.
I would argue, or I would at least make the case that, with rise in better healthcare, better education, so the people who are also less intelligent are also rising up in the intelligence.
In that sense, that's true. It is indeed correct that with that being the case, there's something I'll call the Flynn effect. We can look at that in a minute, where people are being pushed to their phenotypic maximum intelligence more. That's true, but that's not offsetting the genetic selection against intelligence, which hits in probably about 1900. Then you start to see that there is now a negative correlation in Western countries between intelligence and how many children you have, and it carries on so many measures on reaction times are getting longer. They've got longer reaction times correlate with intelligence at about -0.3, and they've got longer between 1880, when they were measured in the same way as now, and the year 2000, consistent with a 15-point drop in IQ. So 15 points is the difference between, I don't know, a school science teacher and a science professor. 15 points. And color discrimination.
This is in spite of the fact that, I mean, we are innovating far more. We're now in the next revolution.
Yeah, but as I just said, we are in it. Well, you've got to distinguish between minor innovations and major innovations. So we can be having lots and lots of minor innovations.
I mean, we've had technological breakthroughs unlike anything in the last 30
Well, but if you plot them across time, which we have done, we're not having anywhere near as many, and they're not anywhere near as important as what was going on in about 1870. 1870 is like the peak. That's the peak of major per capita major innovation. And then it starts to go down. And yeah, there are huge breakthroughs, aeroplane, television, internet, but there's fewer of them. The evidence is that the number of people required to, let's say, double the speed of technology has itself doubled since 1979. And there's just fewer of them. And so there's fewer breakthroughs, which is consistent with all the other data indicating that intelligence is going down. I said earlier that intelligence is decreasing by a point per decade. Now, if it decreases by 3 points, that's 30 years, that halves the percentage of the population with an IQ of over 130, i.e. the smart fraction, the people that are running the society, the innovators, the really clever people. In 30 years, that's halved. And that's a seriously dangerous thing to happen, and that's happened. That's happening. And so,
side thought here, there's a lot of conversation in India right now with the elections of income inequality, and as lesser and lesser groups of people are more intelligent, they are likely to create more wealth and accumulate more wealth. And
yes.
Isn't there a correlation over there as well? I mean, there would be, right? I mean, fewer people would actually accumulate more wealth because they are the innovators.
I see what you mean. Yes, yeah. Well, partly that's true, but and also you would expect the genetic component of intelligence possibly to rise, because people will be. Yeah, let's talk about that. But let me just write that down. I just want to mention the Flynn effect, which is that. So
please.
What was happening was that it was noted from about 1930 onwards that IQs were going up. So. When you think about intelligence is a bit like a pyramid. At the base of the pyramid, you have specialized abilities that are weakly associated with intelligence, like the ability to drive a car or do up your shoelaces or something. And then you move up, and they can be correlated into the 3 main kinds of intelligence: verbal, spatial, mathematical. And then they can be co-correlated into what's called G, which is a general factor of intelligence. And so that's basically intelligence. That's IQ. That's what IQ is measuring. Now, the IQ tests are not perfect measurers of G. They also measure other things, and they measure these things which are weakly associated with G. And what was happening was that a more increasingly scientific environment was, across the 20th century, pushing to its phenotypic maximum certain specialized abilities that weakly correlate with G, to do with spotting patterns and things like this, thinking in a scientific way, basically. With the result that it overwhelmed everything else that was happening on the IQ test, and it came across as an IQ rise. At the same time that was happening, all the other markers, all of the more genetic components of intelligence, because some aspects of intelligence are more environmental, some aspects are more genetic, were going down, but on that it was going up, and it was so huge that it overwhelmed everything else. This is the Flynn effect. And Flynn himself, James Flynn, admitted this, that it wasn't really to do with intelligence going up. Now, once we reached our phenotypic maximum in Western countries for these specialized abilities, then even on the IQ tests, you start to see intelligence going down. And that was on the more genetic aspects of intelligence. And that started in about 1997. So on all of these measures, we're definitely becoming less intelligent. But as for what you were saying about a minority, yeah, I think that you would expect increasingly you have societies which are multi-ethnic, and IQ goes down, and this and trust goes down. And if trust goes down, then because people who are more intelligent are more trusting, but we're becoming less intelligent. And so then you want to be more with people like you. And so then you become more clannish, and you might expect people who were, and you have a cognitive stratification effect, whereby because of the internet, it's so easy now, in the way it didn't used to be, for people that are highly intelligent to find each other, and become friends and have children together. And it used to be, you'd live in some village and you just had to rub along with everybody else, and if you and get on with them. And now you don't have to do that. And so you can imagine the breakup of society, and you can imagine these small groups like that would be highly intelligent, that would see society around them becoming chaotic as it became less and less intelligent, and would break away, would found what you might call neo-Byzantians. Remember, Rome didn't completely collapse. Rome retreated. There was the Dark Age chaos that grew and grew and grew and grew and grew, and Rome retreated to Byzantium. And we have evidence that from even the 10th century, 11th century, that like clever English people, for example, would get the hell out of England and make their way to Byzantium. Of course, in those days, everyone spoke Latin. That was the lingua franca, so you could get along. And so you get this, as society falls down, as society collapses due to falling IQ, then you're going to get these areas where intelligent people, I suggest, will sort of congregate, come together. And as you say, and so you're going to get, it's going to be much more unequal, a complete hollowing out of the middle. I mean, if you look at who's having children in the West, it's two kinds of people that are having children: stupid people and religious people. If you control for intelligence, if you look at just the top quartile of intelligence in the West, the big predictor of fertility is that you are conservative and that you are religious, and the heritability of these is about 60%. And the big predictor of sterility, of not having children, is that you are liberal and that you are an atheist. And so it's as though what we call wokeness in the UK, people that are very left-wing, and it's all virtue signaling about homosexuality and transsexuality and all this stuff.
Yeah,
these people have sort of taken over the society, and they're pushing people on a maladaptive roadmap of life, where they're saying you should feel bad for being white, you should feel bad for being a man, you should feel bad for being a human, you shouldn't have children, you should destroy yourself. And the only people that are going to be resistant to that are going to be those that, even in spite of the environment telling them to do all these damaging things, will be genetically resistant, i.e. those that are genetically conservative. And so it's like a selection event among the intelligent, because intelligence predicts social conformity. Intelligent people look around the world and they notice the way things are, and they understand the social benefits of conforming to the dominant culture, and they force themselves to do so, and they do so. And this is why, if you go back 50 years, intelligence was associated with being conservative in Western countries. It's now associated with being liberal. And so intelligent people are going to be much more likely to be sucked into this death cult of wokeness. And then among those people, then it's going to be the genetically conservatives that will survive it. So it's as if woke people are kind of almost like a group level adaptation that is going to make people genetically healthy again. Because remember that being left wing is associated with being mentally ill. It's associated with being physically ill. It's associated with we were basically selecting under harsh Darwinian conditions to be religious and to be group oriented and to be ethnocentric. And so those things genetically correlate with mental and physical health. When those conditions collapse, you're going to get a rise in mutants that are going to deviate from what we were selected for. And what we were selected for was to be conservative, to be right-wing, to be religious, whatever. And so you're going to get a rise in these left-wing people that are individually oriented, that are concerned with equality and harm avoidance and the good of themselves, basically, and not really concerned with obedience to authority or sanctity or the good of the group. And so then they will build up in the population, which I think they have, and then you will tip over. There's evidence that if about 20% of a society believes something, even if it's wrong, if they have the sort of power, the sense of the future, then the whole society tips over. I think we tipped over in about 1963, and then we became this liberal society. The benefit of being in India, I think, and this is what I want to stress to your Indian viewers, is that India is kind of the future. Like, India is less decadent than the West. India can look to the West and can say, well, look, this is what happens to the West. This is what happens if you have multiculturalism, if you have too much feminism, if you have all this stuff. This is what happens. You fall apart. And so you can, and Eastern Europe's a bit like that as well. They can look to the West and they can say, we don't want this to happen to us. And what you would expect to happen, and this is, I mean, this happened. Look at the difference between Athens and Rome. So 200 BC or 300 BC, Athens is the dominant place. Athens is up, selection pressure weakens in Athens. Athens becomes much more individually oriented, concerned with individualistic values, concerned with harm avoidance and feelings and all this stuff. A decadent, basically. And Athens falls, and it is replaced by Rome. And Rome, over another 500 years, the same thing happens to Rome. And then it is replaced by Islam. And it's what Ibn Khaldun, the Islamic philosopher Ibn Khaldun said, that you have the desert tribesman. The desert tribesman comes in, he founds the city, he reduces harsh levels of selection, he reduces asabiyah, this Arabic term meaning groupishness. And so then the new desert tribesman comes in and invades, and it just carries on. And that's what's happening in the West. We have run out. We're in the winter. We're under weakened selection pressure. We're mutated. We're falling apart. And so somewhere like India, child mortality in India is higher. You've been under harsh Darwinian selection for longer than us. And so you are less mutated, you are less weakened. And so I would expect the light of civilization to pass to India for a number of reasons. Firstly, just because of what I said about the evolutionary difference and so on. And secondly, the intelligence profile in India is very interesting because you have the average IQ in India is about 80, so it's not very high. It's about the same as, like, I don't know, Algeria or something, but you have the caste system. And so the caste system means that you have these very, 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 very intelligent people. And you also have areas of India, specific areas, especially in the south, where the IQ is very, very high. Going back to Islam, what predicts a low IQ area in India is level of Islam. In the north,
so I was just going to come to that. So north, you're saying the IQ is lesser than the south, where firstly, actually the Hindu population is much higher. It's around about 85, 86% if you look at certain states. And in the north is probably much higher, 25, 26, 27% Islamic populations, a collective of states. But most people in India, who are going to be listening to this, would argue that this is because Muslims have been kept out of development. And this is a constant accusation. You see, the Indian constitution actually puts minorities above. We are actually the last surviving apartheid nation constitutionally. The majority is discriminated against. It actually puts minorities on a pedestal, whether they are Islamic, Christian, or whoever else. And the people who get the maximum benefit of minorityism, even though the Parsis are the smallest minority, if you know, the Parsis are Zoroastrians who under Islamic revolution and earlier, came into India in hordes and are the Tatas of India, and the biggest business enterprises are the Parsis.
Yeah,
they are the smallest minority, or the Jains after that, right? But nobody feels discriminated against except the Muslims and sometimes the Christian minority in India as well.
I think about what feeling discriminated against means. I mean, the Parsis have very high IQ, yeah.
Yeah, this is constantly the case. So one would argue, Muslims would argue, listening to this, that, oh, that's because we are not given the right education. It's the same education offered to every citizen of the country. Muslims choose not to, is how most Hindus would look at it. There is a lot more ghettoization. There is a lot more of sending kids to madrasas, this fear of God, Allah. You put kids not in secular schools where they learn secular education, but there's this constant complaint about, being left out consciously, So
low intelligence is associated with low trust. One, because if you are stupid, you're more likely to be conned, so it makes sense to trust nobody. So it would follow that less intelligent groups would be less trusting, would be more paranoid, and would be more likely to think that they're discriminated against. Secondly, intelligence correlates with agreeableness weakly. People that are intelligent are more altruistic and more empathetic, partly because they can understand the minds of other people better. And so for that reason, they're just kinder, they're nicer. And so they're more likely to be more trusting, and they're more likely to, not be paranoid and whatever. So you would expect that, ironically, the very people that are getting the most benefits from this system to be saying, oh, we don't get any benefits, we want more and more and more and more and more. Thirdly, I did a study on this, on group differences in ethnocentrism. The level of ethnocentrism among Muslims is very high. They're very strongly ethnocentric. They're very, very high in groupishness, in looking after the interests of their own group over any other consideration. That would predict, obviously, always fighting for your group and its interests. Who cares about the truth? What matters is you dominating everybody else and you having the most. That's what matters. And so you would, of course, expect them to react in that way, no matter how much they may be given by the Indian state. Also,
so
the degree intelligence correlates with low intelligence basically correlates almost like with arrogance. Like you think you're better than other people. You're superior. You think you're better, and so therefore you're never going to accept that it's something you've done wrong. You're never going to accept that madrasas where you just sit there and learn the Quran off by heart in Arabic it's going to be a bad way of educating kids. No, it's you can't do anything wrong. You're brilliant. And so I'm not surprised by the response at all. It is true. I've done some research into the caste system and whatever. Obviously, it's true. If it's obviously, I mean, you had a president who was a Dalit many years ago, right? Now, obviously, if you live in a village, and you do now.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, and even your current president,
Prime Minister,
your prime minister, he was low caste. He's not.
Yeah,
he's not,
yes, from other backward classes as classified.
He's not Dalit, but he's whatever. He's Sudra or something. And so, obviously, it's awful to be in an environment where you're being, people don't want to touch you, or you can't go into the temple, or people don't pour tea into your cup because they can't be near you or whatever. Horrible, fine, but it's horrible as an individual. But at the group level, that's what's interesting to me in the evolution in India. How do you there are different ways that you can beat other groups. So you're up against another group. You have to come up with a way of winning in the battle for resources with that group. Now, if it's really, really cold, like Japan, then it's harsh selection. It's going to select in favor of being very strongly agreeable and conscientious and socially anxious and cooperative. You're going to then be quite genetically different from outsiders because you're going to be very strongly evolved for that specific environment. So you're going to be high in positive ethnocentrism, internal cooperation, high in negative ethnocentrism, external violence. That's your strategy. That's your strategy. Now, how can you create ethnocentrism if the environment is really, really hot and basic needs are met and all this? How can you create that sense of internal cooperation? There's a number of methods you can use. One of the ones that's been adopted in a lot of Islamic countries is cousin marriage. So if you marry your cousin, in order to have positive male cooperation, men can't believe they're going to be cuckolded. Men have to think their children are theirs. You can't have men fighting all the time. How do you stop men fighting? You reassure them that their children are theirs. And how do you reassure them their children are theirs? They get to control the sexuality of women, i.e. you have patriarchy. So you make the women wear veils and you control the women and whatever. Equally, if you bring in cousin marriage, then even if the child isn't yours, he's still strongly genetically related to you, so you might as well invest in your children. And also if you bring in cousin marriage, you're canalizing things genetically. You're making sure everyone's genetically similar. And the thing that predicts cooperation is genetic similarity. Friends are more genetically similar than two random members of the same population. Why? Because you have a friend, you're indirectly passing on your genes. You tend to marry people, not just in India where you have the caste system, but everywhere. You tend to marry people that are genetically more similar to you than chance would predict, because you're passing on more of your genes. And so this is another way of creating ethnocentrism, and that's what Islam is basically. Most Islamic countries seem to have followed that way of doing things. India's not so high on cousin marriage, but what you have come up with is the caste system. It's not the only place with the caste system. There's caste systems in Somalia, in Nigeria, What the caste system means is that another way of dominating other societies is through having geniuses, through having brilliant people that come up with brilliant inventions, the genius strategy. And that's what the British have done. So we're not that ethnocentric, but then we cooperate with foreigners, and this allows us to trade, and this expands our gene pool, and then we come up with geniuses by genetic chance, because that's what geniuses are. They're born to highly intelligent people, but they're way more intelligent than their parents, just by genetic chance, like unlikely genetic combinations. That's why they don't breed true in the children of geniuses. Like Darwin was a genius, his kids weren't geniuses, his parents weren't geniuses, but he was. And then we expand and we come up with brilliant ideas and we expand and we dominate other people, even though we're less ethnocentric than them. India's got a strategy a bit like that, I think. The caste system helps to ensure that you have at the top of society very, very, very intelligent people. And then they come up with these strategies. And it also reduces internal social conflict. So if everyone just does the same job their parents did, then there's less sort of social conflict. So that's that strategy. But anyway, I'm not surprised by their reactions. It seems to me on average they're studying on this. There are caste differences in IQ. There are. And those caste differences in IQ are in the direction you would predict. That is to say that the higher castes have higher IQ and the lower castes have lower IQ. Yeah. There's also some evidence that the higher castes have higher levels of European admixture, genetic admixture, which is in favor of the Indo-European hypothesis. And then there are these regional differences. And part of it, I think, is that in northern India, as you say, it's Islamic, it's much more Islamic. The center of Islamic India, Taj Mahal, whatever, was of course northern India. I find it funny as well that they can say that they're discriminated against if you think that until quite recently, most of India was literally run by Muslims. I mean, Muslims were the upper class. We went to India and we regarded the Muslims as people we could do business with. And you had in the 18th century what's called white moguls. So these English people from the East India Company that would marry, I know, like, for example, there was a guy called, I think it was his name, William Dalrymple, I can't remember.
Yes.
And he married the daughter of the Prime Minister of Hyderabad. And he adopted Islam. And he'd sit there with a hookah and whatever, and the Hindus we didn't like because they ate with their hands and they worshipped multiple gods, which was weird. And now it's all kind of reversed. But it's obviously a very unfair system.
This seems to be a trait within Islam. Wouldn't you say that? I mean, I find a lot of these videos circulating from Belgium, from England, they all want Sharia. So this seems bizarre to me. You leave your own country where you have Sharia and you have all these harsh rules, and you go to Europe and you go to US and all these sort of advanced societies. You want to live off the welfare system, and you want Sharia. So and if you go back, I was trying to, you alluded to this, that Muhammad had, while he didn't have, big influence in whether it was Mecca or Medina, I think, Mecca, I believe, where he was trying to convince people about Allah and all of that, and then it was like forced. So there are two different versions of the Quran. They're called Meccan ayats and the Medini ayats. The complaint earlier was, and even later, was constantly about that we've been discriminated against, and there is a justification to every act of violence. So, for example, Banu Qurayza, 900 Jews are killed overnight. Okay, all the male children are killed, slaughtered, heads chopped. They had to dig their grave, and these are prisoners of war. It's actually it's a very bad case of how of behavior in war. In India, you see, if you go in the epics, there are rules of war. The sun sets, even the worst of enemies would stop war. You're not allowed to conduct war once the sun sets. As it rises, you go about killing each other. Okay, so there are rules of war. You don't touch women and children. You don't go kill the farmers. All of these rules were broken during Islamic invasions.
Well, if you look at the old, I mean, a lot of what Muhammad drew upon and Muhammad, one of his sisters was Christian, One of his wives was a Jew. He had a great deal of knowledge of all of this stuff. And the Old Testament is basically saying the same thing. It's a group selection manifesto. It has the concept of harem. And this is that you go into your enemy's area and you kill everybody and everything, and even their farm animals, like everything. You destroy everything. Harem. And basically it comes down to an evolutionary strategy. So when Muhammad starts, it's the typical middle class purity signaler. You're middle class, you want to get status, you're a bit neurotic maybe because that predicts being middle class, you're anxious so you work hard so you become middle class. And so you don't want a fair fight. So like a woman, you virtue signal or you purity signal, and that's how he gets to the top. And he's obviously this charismatic man. And then when he's about 40, he has this conversion experience where the angel Gabriel appears to him, or so he says, and tells him that he should start this new religion, one God. So it's purity signaling. At the time, you've got the worship of one God. You've got people that worship all these other gods. Like with Moses. Moses comes along, you've got all these people worshiping lots of different gods, and he says, no, 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 you must worship one God, Yahweh. And he's saying exactly the same thing with the Arab pantheon, Allah. And it's a way of drawing in people that are highly religious, and it's a test of membership. Basically, will you intellectually submit to us by saying that I believe in these dogmas, you know, that there's one God and Muhammad is his prophet or whatever, and it's a way of getting women, because women are more religious than men, and women are attracted to charismatic men like that. So he gets 11 wives, but then tells other people they only have 4. And then he goes away to Medina, and he returns with an army. He takes over. So now there's all these people following him. So now he's really high status. So all the women want him, and those that are attracted around him, all the women want them. And then you just go into other areas and you take their land and you kill their men and you take their women. And this is just war. This is what happens. But it's sanctified as God's will. That's what religion does. It takes that which is adaptive, it sanctifies it as God's will. You can have variations on this. You can have other religions, as you say, with Hinduism, that will have other kind of rules or whatever. But then there's probably subgroups within the religion that might deviate from that. But that's the dominant group, and he keeps getting these revelations from Allah telling him, yeah, you can do this, you know. And then you have the Hadith, of course, and the other books which are telling you what he said within his life. And what you're basically doing is selecting for a group which is bigger. You get a larger policy. Ultimately, what wins? A bigger policy or a smaller policy? It's all else being equal, it's a bigger policy. You create this bigger policy. It's more ethnically diverse. It's probably going to therefore throw up sort of more genius and maybe and stuff like that. And then you have to have big gods. You can't. You have to be able to cooperate with people that you're never going to see again. How do you do that? You have to believe in the same God so you can trust them. So you have big gods, moral gods, and you're taking away what you used to have, which was local little gods and house gods. And he's saying, no, don't worship those. You've got to worship this one big God. And we all have to do that. And then he comes up with these various interesting things which are good for the group. I mean, he's anti-homosexuality, he's pro-polygamy, and polygamy will mean that the dominant intelligent men pass on more of their genes, and so within reason that's good. Although you've got to keep the men that can't get any women on board. How do you do that? You have jihad, and you tell them that there will be 72 virgins in heaven and they will have a permanent erection. So therefore, they have a reason to be on board as well, and it's just a sort of it's an evolutionary system which has worked quite well. And then when it gets into a position of power, which it did in the Baghdad and in the Golden Age, then it calms down and you become less religious. But if you're put under stress, the predictor of being highly religious is that you're put under stress and mortality statements, but it's also feeling that you are discriminated against. If you feel, then you become more religious. Religiousness hits in because it's adaptive in those circumstances. It makes you feel better, makes you feel you're important, makes you feel brilliant, and you fight back. And I think that's what the Muslims feel. The Muslims feel this is a Hindu state, increasingly a Hindu state. I mean, if you think about in the 2004 election, and you had Sonia Gandhi, and she was the leader of the Congress Party, and everybody knew that I don't know what you think of the Congress Party, but everybody knew that if the Congress Party wins, Sonia Gandhi is prime minister.
Yeah.
And she was Italian.
Yeah.
And everybody knew that. But then no, they weren't having that. No way. No way. Ironically, here we are in England, and we have a Hindu prime minister,
yeah.
and nobody mentioned that 20 years ago in India. No way. There's no way the BJP were having that. They said it was a national disgrace.
Yeah.
And she was so concerned that she'd be assassinated that they put in that Sikh, Mr. Singh, as the kind of puppet prime minister. I guess she was ruling things from behind the scenes.
Yes. Yes,
but that shows you the difference in ethnocentrism, you know. And if England, I mean, go back to 1992, only 1992. And there was in England a constituency in the election called Cheltenham. Mm-hmm. And the Conservatives put up a black candidate. And he lost against the Liberal Democrat candidate because he was black. It's quite simple. Because in those days, you had these people that were born in 1910, whatever, still voting, brought up with more mortality salience, more religious, more ethnocentric, you know, and they weren't having that. No way. And India, I guess, is more like that now. It's that kind of level. Us in the 90s or 70s. And so it's not as, and that means that I think there's like a balance. If you become too open a society, you know, too decadent, too rich, then you stop caring. You don't have a sense of your own eternal importance. You don't have a sense of mission and of the future, and it just all becomes about, you know, wealth and money,
which is what Douglas Murray worries about.
That's what's happened to us. The
strange death of Europe.
Yeah, strange death. I've met Douglas Murray, and yeah, I mean it's that's exactly it. And this is what happens to the Greeks. It's what happened to the Romans. It's happening to us. And so you expect a transfer to India.
So let's come back to. I mean, maybe we're way past our 1 hour, but what happens now? So Islam takes over all of Europe, takes over the world.
I suspect, yeah.
Or is there going to be a fight back from the conservatives?
Yeah, there's going to be. I mean, I've done this. I'll show you this book. The past is a future country, the coming conservative demographic revolution. Mm-hmm. And so, what's basically happening in terms of the breeding patterns is we will become more and more and more Islamic in Western countries, and we will become less and less and less white. But among those who are white, they will, for genetic reasons, gradually become more and more and more right-wing and conservative and nationalistic. Because that, if you select for intelligence, and what matters in a society is not what the average person thinks, it's what the smart fraction thinks, because they rule society. So I suspect that you're already seeing it in Generation Z, in those born around about the year 2000. They're not as left-wing as they should be. Of course, they're the most left-wing generation ever. But you should be able to, like this, for many generations, you can say quite predictably, people that are 20 are this much more left-wing than people that are 40, because you tend to get more conservative with age.
Yes.
And this is now broken down with Generation Z. Why? Because two reasons. One, because there's some kind of polarization effect. So how did you rebel even when I was a kid? Well, you're at the fag end of a religious conservative society. So you rebel by being an atheist and being a liberal and whatever. Well, these people have been brought up by atheist liberals. So obviously those rebellion types, they're going to rebel by being conservative and right-wing. That's one way they can rebel. You know, they've been brought up not by a teacher saying, tuck your shirt in and, you know, be polite and don't swear. It's going to be, don't culturally appropriate your shirt and don't use racist words. You know, so that's one reason. I think a second reason is this growing situation where among the more intelligent, the people that are conservative and religious are the big breeders, and we're now seeing this come out in that generation, and so a subsection of them are becoming more right wing, and so I think eventually there will be a flip back, a percolation upwards into positions of power among the whites of people that are more right-wing and more conservative. And also the left, the woke, are pushing people to become more right-wing and more conservative. Like they're rubbing our destruction in our faces. They're saying, look, you've been invaded. No, you never get a TV commercial where there's a white couple on British TV. It's always a black man and a white woman. It's sending the message to white men, you've been invaded and you're over and you're finished. And people, and they rewrite our history in documentaries. They, use foreign actors or whatever. And so eventually people started to rebel against this. And the transsexuality thing particularly is annoying people. And so I think that eventually the woke are creating that, as I say, the woke are a group selected thing. They've come about to make us once again, what we're selecting for a long time is stupidity, poor genetic health, poor mental health, poor physical health, being left wing. They all cluster together. And eventually you get to a point where you have you get this runaway individualism, ever more concerned with equality and harm avoidance. Then you start arguing that you shouldn't have children. It's virtuous not to have children. It's virtuous to change sex. It's
But
whatever.
Professor Dutton, this is all actually dumb in some ways. They don't look at data. They don't look at what people are going through. People who do surgeries to change sex they have the highest suicide rates in the US. I mean,
Yeah,
I would think as an outsider that these are actually less intelligent people as a group, all the woke culture.
no, they're more intelligent because social conformity, intelligence is predicted by social conformity, and then you competitively socially conform.
Okay.
And so at the moment, no, they are more intelligent on average. But the thing is that that's sent them mad. They're promoting this madness, and they are increasingly. It's like woke eugenics. That's how I see it. Like it's almost like social justice is masked for social Darwinism. What they're doing is bringing about a situation where the only people that are going to end up breeding are going to be those that they hate. Are going to be the conservative and the religious among the more intelligent. And what they're also doing is pushing people, if you don't agree with them increasingly, more and more and more, well, then you're right wing and you're a fascist and you're a Nazi and you're evil. And so that's like they're forcing people together who are right wing, who wouldn't otherwise have met. And so making people more ethnocentric in a way, and more likely to breed with each other and pass on right wingness in a way that wouldn't have happened before. And they're creating this polarization. And the result eventually will be a flip back towards being right wing. They're basically bringing back a situation where the only survivors are the people that would have been the norm before the Industrial Revolution. That's what and it's almost like, I think it's almost like an adaptation, I think. I think it's like either we become so unhealthy and genetically sick that when the next volcano erupts or the next solar flare hits, we all die, except for those that are off the grid, that live on the Andaman Islands or something. Or something has to happen. If you have absolutely no selection pressure, then something has to happen. And what that is selection pressure to be highly fertile and to want children and so on. And that's what these woke people are bringing about. They're like angels of Darwin. That are forcing a situation where only the people that are highly genetically healthy survive. It's quite fascinating, this is what they're bringing about. And I think the thing that's frightening is that in Japan and Korea, they're not very genetically diverse. Like they're so low in psychopathology, because these woke people are high in psychopathology and individually oriented things, Machiavellianism, narcissism. They're so low in that and their gene pool is so small that there's no wokeness there. These mutants are not being thrown up, so they may well just die off. That Europe would continue, and as I say, with India, I'm thinking that the level of mortality salience and poverty, basically. I don't mean to be patronizing. I've only been to India once, and that was in 2007. But it seems to me that even if you're quite rich in India, all you have to do is walk around the street and you can see how far you can fall. And if you don't work hard, I mean, you can get seriously bad. And this acts as a motivator. It probably elevates instinctiveness. It probably elevates religiousness. It probably elevates ethnocentrism. And with our system, we Europeans, this genius system, where you're low in ethnocentrism, but you're high in genius, and that's how you dominate other people's, your brilliant inventions and whatever. That's fine, as long as the level of instinctiveness doesn't drop too low. Because when it drops too low, then you're very low in ethnocentrism. And you're going to get invaded, and you're not even going to care. And that's what has happened to us. And so in our evolutionary match, that genius system, the kind of Indo-European Aryan system, really, of the band of brothers that look up to people that have high achievement, really, rather than the ethnocentric system, the clan system, that works really well. But if it then ironically achieves civilization and is then its own undoing. And so what I want to stress to your many viewers, really, I know you want to talk mainly about Islam, but you should prepare for it. What is being created in the West would be a kind of white Taliban that would move back towards being conservative in the bad ways as well as the good ways. Mm-hmm. I mean, remember in the 60s in England, if a child was born illegitimately, it would be taken away from its parents and adopted by strangers because it was so socially unacceptable to have an illegitimate child. Like, that's
unlikely to roll back to those times.
No, but it could do if you become really conservative. I mean, I think how people think in a place like, I don't know, Utah, like what it's like to live somewhere like that. There's many good things about it. I've been there. It's wonderful, friendly, no crime, lovely, whatever. But there's definite social rules that you don't break. You no way have sex before marriage, no way. And there's no tolerance of this kind of thing, and so there's the rough with the smooth. But it seems to me that in places like India, there's that balance is right, where you're not yet too low in instinct, possibly for genetic reasons, and possibly because of the environment. And particularly if I look at the data, I've just got this paper up on it. So the most intelligent area is Goa, from what we can work out based on test scores. Sorry, not Goa. Goa 256, Tripura. Okay. Very high scores in Tripura, in Daman and Diu.
Okay.
And then very low scores in like Jammu Kashmir. That's the lowest.
Yeah, that's okay.
That's what you would expect, of course. But yeah. So in terms of that clash within India, I guess what you would expect is Pakistan is probably become more religious. Bangladesh is probably becoming more, Islam is much more fundamentalist. And you have within India then the rise of this quite nationalistic system in India that's increasingly, as far as I don't know what the election result's going to be, but it's clearly been growing in popularity, this kind of idea. So you end up with...
Absolutely. So it's the same push towards just like you're saying conservatism in Europe. The Indian conservatism is a little bit different. It's not becoming a white Taliban for sure, but it does fall back into what has worked for us for a few thousand years. But there is a wonderful book which actually calls out that the rise of Modi and BJP government in the last 10 years, the rise of, if you like, Hindu nationalism, right, is not because Modi came to power, but Modi is a consequence of the rise of this collective consciousness, which is nothing but, in my view, in my understanding, a fight back. We've had enough. We've really had enough of constantly being pushed, constantly, just like exactly how white men in UK are being treated, or in America, that you're the bad guys, you did all this wrong to us, constantly telling us all this nonsense, in spite of having been the rulers of India for, anything between 300 to 1,000 years, depending on which part of India. So yes, that it's just a fight back, to save our identity. So it's that instinct kicking in, no doubt about that. No doubt about that.
Good, because someone has to keep the flame going when the West has AI and everyone plugs themselves into kind of vanilla sky machines and just conks out. So I think it's quite important.
Very good. Been a lovely conversation. I will probably go and watch this conversation a couple of more times because it's been so hard to keep pace with all these terms you use.
All right.
They're new to me.
They need to remember, your viewers, that the light of civilization will pass there, and you need to prepare for it. Bharat Sabhyataka Bhavishe. Hey, is that how you say it? Bharat Sabhyataka Bhavishe. India is the future of...
Bhavishya.
Bharat Sabhyataka Bhavishe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Bharat
You have to know that.
Bharat Sabhyataka Bhavishya. Okay, got it.
That's how they have to do.
Good one. All right. Thank you Professor Dutton. It's been lovely, and hopefully we'll have you again. Hopefully, audience will have when they watch this this session, we'll have a lot more questions. I know I will be getting a lot of criticism. You use terms which would sort of flare up people who come on my challenge. Indo-Aryan, they're gonna like balk at me for not challenging you for that. But then
Indo-European, whatever term you want to use.
No, that's fine. We'll send you more information about that. But yeah, lovely talking to you.
Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one. Bye. Namaste.